So good. I don't even know if we're running yet.
Yeah.
Yes. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. Little slow on the uptake today. So today we have Dr. Anita Sengupta. She is the CEO of a company called Hydroplane. Now, Dr. Sengupta, thank you so much for joining us today. We are honored to have your presence with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, you are literally a rocket scientist. You're a Boston University Terrier. We just had that discussion that we're all that 3 out of 4 of us are alumni. Not to discount Miss Joy, but you have worked in JPL, NASA. I believe you're an aeronautical engineer, which is aerospace engineer. So very highly accomplished. You are literally a rocket scientist. Women in tech. Please tell us everything you're working on. Hydrogen fuel cells. I mean, it's amazing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and all my degrees are in aerospace engineering, BS Boston University, and MS PhD at USC. And I've always been interested in both the space side of aerospace as well as the aviation side of aerospace. So first half of my career, I spent working on space, and now for the mid-career portion, I'm focused on sustainable electric aviation.
And we've talked a lot about sustainable aviation. We had a previous company that did electric airplanes. You're focused on hydrogen. I think it's very important to have energy diversification. We need multiple sources of energy, multiple sources of transportation. And one of the things I wanted to ask your professional opinion on is transportation, the future of transportation, but also infrastructure. Because the way it's going right now, our infrastructure is not too great.
It's true. And I would say if you look at the amount of money which is required to implement a new form of transportation, the majority of the capital gets spent on the infrastructure as opposed to the new technologies and the platforms that actually provide the mobility. So you have to do both to enable a shift in decarbonization.
Decarbonization key, especially right now when we have the COP26 summit going on in Glasgow. That's been a huge topic of conversation. One of the just to kind of trail a little bit away from infrastructure and hydrogen and engines, women in tech is kind of not new, but it is a challenge. You've got 3 women on this call right now. We're all in science backgrounds. Joy's more finance, but also science background. It's a challenge. I mean, I'm a geologist, geochemist, and women in the field were not always welcome. And I can imagine probably what your experiences were in NASA or JPL or just being a rocket scientist.
Yeah, I would say the field, if you look at aerospace, is about 15% female. And I actually think that percentage has been the same over the past 20 years, which means that sadly, from a pipeline perspective, it hasn't improved. So that is always something that we have to address and ask ourselves why that is. But I would say NASA as an institution actually does much better in terms of having more diversity on women and ethnic diversity front. And that's because obviously it's government and it's very science focused. But if you go look more on the aviation side or the military industrial complex side, then you get even fewer women. But it's an issue that we have to address because diversity of teams leads to diversity of solutions.
I'm glad you mentioned with NASA because one of my favorite people is Dr. Farouk Elbaz, who was one of NASA's first hires in the early 60s. And we've had him on our show before, and he's a former Boston University guy. And he always promoted women. He always said he loves teaching women, he loves educating women because they are not afraid to ask questions. Because he said, in lectures or in meetings, he said, the men will say, oh, I don't want to be wrong, so I won't ask. He said, women will ask. They don't care. They'll ask the questions. They'll get it done. So he's always been supportive of women and being, one of the leaders of NASA in the early days. I absolutely believe that. But going on through education, young girls in school, what was it like for you being so geared towards science and tech as a child and just saying, this is what I want to be an engineer, which was probably not the norm.
It's true. So I had a little bit of help. My dad was a mechanical engineer, a PhD mechanical engineer, although he never tried to force it on me. He actually tried to force it on my brother. So there's a little bit of this. societal biases there. But I always looked up to him in terms of the way that he solved problems. Just had a very methodical, unique way of being able to get anything done. So he let me help him fix the car and do, modifications to the electric system in the house. So very much hands-on working with him. And to be honest with you, the real reason why I got into aerospace engineering and engineering in general is because of science fiction. Huge science fiction fan. I used to watch reruns of original series Star Trek with my dad when I was a little kid. I watched Doctor Who, the original ones, reruns on Channel 21 in New York. So I knew that I wanted to be involved in the space program in some way. So it was actually more of a choice of whether I went like astrophysics, astronomy, or aerospace engineering. It's a great story here related to BU. When you're starting to, at least back in the 90s, when you're starting to get to the point where you're going to go to college, you start getting all of these flyers from these different universities. And I got a flyer from Boston University. I'm like, oh, they have an aerospace engineering program. And I went for some weekend that they had for potential students, and I ended up picking Boston University for aerospace engineering.
Fantastic! Tell us more about the BU Aerospace Engineering Department. Because I was a geologist, or I guess I still am, but I went to the geology department and I stayed in Stone Hall, and I stayed there. I did not leave.
Oh, well, it was a small department, and I think maybe now it's combined with mechanical engineering to the same department. So it was definitely small. And in the mid to late 90s, when I went to school, aerospace was not a very well-funded field with regards to job opportunities. So I think in general, all around the country, there weren't many people getting aerospace engineering degrees. But it's something I really wanted to do. I didn't want to shift to mechanical. I think there was probably only 2 women in the whole program, at least for my graduating year. I just, it's all I ever wanted to do. So for me, that was just not an issue.
That's awesome. Yeah. Go ahead, Joel. Go ahead.
I guess I'm curious. So actually I have 2 questions for you. One, did you watch Land of the Lost, which was one of the best sci-fi shows of all times? I know they went back in time and they were with dinosaurs, but that was one of the best shows ever. Total segue there. That and Alf. This is how my mind works. So when it comes to getting more of the diversity and inclusion, obviously this is a huge topic that we're going through society right now. Where do you see the changes are happening, or where they need to happen, or how do you foresee the future when it comes to getting more women involved with this field?
So I think it's a hard question for me to give you a definitive answer to, because it's not my field of study and I haven't analyzed the data to see what has worked and what hasn't worked. But logically, it seems as though seeing more people that look like you is a way to get people into the pipeline, and you have to address them younger. So it can't be at high school age, because at high school age, you may have already made up your mind or just not be willing to follow that track. So you've got to get to kids when they're kind of in middle school, early middle school, and then expose them to scientists and engineers and technologists who look like them, whether that's ethnic diversity, women. And I think there's just an absence of that. And there's also the societal pressures, right? Media oftentimes presents scientists and engineers in a certain way, right, in terms of demographics as well. And I think all of that plays on the minds of people who just don't have the exposure. But I think exposure in the middle school time frame to people actively working in the school and being able to do engineering classes, for example, so they know what it even is, would be a role to, or way to address that.
Yeah, we need to change some of the way that we're doing public schooling, right?
Yeah.
Some of the programs that we're taking out, programs that we need to incorporate, which are more, math and, engineering type programs for some of these kids. I'm fortunate enough to work in the legislature at Silicon Beach. So we get companies like Facebook, Google, YouTube, that have tried to work with the community to try to put weekend programs at some of the high schools and junior highs. But I just don't think that the message is being translated too well from the teachers to the sponsors of some of these programs as to how important these programs are. We're taught as kids, especially young women, go into the teaching profession, become a teacher, or barely business or engineering programs. So I don't really see the school districts themselves or anybody in the powers that be really pushing these type of programs, even though there are some generous programs out there like Facebook, Google, YouTube, that are actually trying to get programs into these communities. So Yeah, I think we need to do a better job pushing, Anita. And since you're teaching as well, at USC, what type of ideas would you say to really foster these type of programs in various areas?
Good one.
Well, I think that robotics programs are a great way for students to get hands-on experience working with hardware, as well as doing coding, software development, as well as team building and team-oriented solutions. So I think that's a great way. Hopefully, sometimes there's a bit of a financial barrier to entry because I think, like FIRST robotics is super expensive. So I don't think that's a good solution for all school districts because they just may not be able to afford it. So some other more cost-effective robotics program, or even electric aviation, sort of a small kit airplane to learn about aerodynamics and propulsion. But I also think it's important for everybody who is a professional in this field to pay it forward and to pay it back. Which is to get yourself out there, to attend your local career fairs, to go and give talks at schools. And so, excuse me, this is something I've been doing for many years, since 2011. I'm giving talks at local schools in Los Angeles. And I think that community engagement is really important. It can't just be left up to corporate entities who are coming up with these, prepackaged programs, which are great, right? Super educational, great material, but you need to have people from the communities coming back and talking directly to students so they can really say, oh, this is somebody who I could be like. This is somebody who I can relate to. This is somebody who lives down the street from me. And I can't imagine how powerful that is. And I've had so many people tell me over the years who are now, undergraduates. I've done many different talks in India, for example. Like, I went and became an engineer because of the lecture I saw you give. It's perfect.
Amazing.
That's what you want to see happen. I'm going to take some water.
Yeah.
But it's so important. I mean, it really is making it just kind of like, this is a normal thing that you can do. It really is.
You can be an engineer.
But I mean, seriously, it's like, but it's showing kids the possibilities that are out there before them. I mean, you were very fortunate because, like you said, your father, you were surrounded by science your whole life. And then, but, I remember being in school and science was just kind of like, you were forced to do it. I mean, I remember, I have memories of science class, but whatever. So it was one of those things that you were forced to do, but it wasn't kind of like, okay, let's actually show the real world applications here. Like, we're just going to light a Bunsen burner. We're going to do this. I'm like, okay. So it wasn't like, there was something about it. There wasn't this coolness. I hate to say that word, but there wasn't the coolness factor that comes with it. It was more like a requirement, like you have to do this, as opposed to should do this.
I think a lot of it has to do with the teacher because my high school, I had a high school teacher, Mr. Bandos, still remember him. He made it cool.
Same.
That guy made science cool. I just loved being in his class and, lighting up that Bunsen burner because he made it interesting. We did fun stuff. So I think it depends on the teacher, not just the whole field per se. But bringing up Dr. Anita's father, I love that you brought that up again. So when I was a kid, this is my personal experience, I had my own tool set by the time I was 4 years old. And whenever something needed to be taken apart, disassembled, worked on, my parents just held me up and I would undo it and then I'd put it back together again. And so I had that pre-wired brain to do that. But as I got older, I don't know if it was society or family or what, I was kind of pushed into the more feminine things in life and more interest in fashion and animals. And that engineering brain of mine got turned off. And it didn't get rediscovered until college when I started doing geology. And I really loved structural geology and chemistry. So I love the fact you brought that up. I think we need to start very young for diversity in these fields. Children are important. Having parents encourage it important. Just, I love the fact you speak to these students. I think more people should. That's just my 2 cents.
And as you're teaching, as you teach more and you do more, you see, are you seeing a change? Like, are you seeing more women coming into the field? Do you notice a change?
Well, I mean, I've been teaching since I think 2011, and I wouldn't say there's been an increase, but somewhere between, at least at USC, I think it's somewhere between 20 and 30% in aerospace. But aerospace obviously represents on maybe the lower end of the percentage of women, but still not enough. And I think that's the reason why something does need to change to get more people to pipeline, but not just women, right? Also, different ethnicities being represented. I think that hasn't changed either, unfortunately. So I think, if we attack this from a diversity angle, we can solve that problem and get more, equality in the workplace by getting better representation. I would love to see that. that's really important, to me, to see that happen. But I think the other thing that is important is for young people to find a purpose, right? And so I would say the biggest existential crisis we have as a species and as a planet is climate change. And so if little kids understand that they can actually do something to address that, to save the planet, to protect animals, to improve the quality of their even local environment, and they can see that this is a pathway to be able to do that, becoming a scientist and engineer, I think that's actually a pretty strong motivator for almost everybody. So I would say a departure from focus on trying to become wealthy and become the next app developer and a focus on trying to develop solutions to help their communities and to help the planet, to save the planet. I can't think of a better motivator.
Absolutely.
I think you're so right. And I think kids are you're starting to see more and more, whether it's the next generation that's coming up or the industries that are out there, they're actually looking at how do I make, because let's be realistic, we're all taught you have to make money. You just have, that's just who we are. It's about money, 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 money. And so, but your kids are, all these people are developing that we can create the app that can be used as a way to kind of like monitor what you're doing, and you can create these things. And so that can be monetized to make them money, but it also works back to the environment. So it's interesting to watch all these pieces of these puzzles come together. And I think the next generation is the one that's really going to start pushing harder for that, which is fantastic. But like you said, I think climate change is a great motivator for people to get back into the science field.
And Anita, just watching you and, knowing your background and, knowing that you actually teach, I think one of the things and the key components that are needed for kids that are in junior high are younger are teachers who actually are scientists. And in order to get those teachers that are qualified, that are top-notch, just like you are, we're going to also have to look at the economy of scale and making sure that we're paying teachers right so that they want to get back into these public schools to make sure that they are actually teaching. Most of these teachers at the elementary levels are, they get a science kit. No more than reading the directions like you or I could on making a cake, right? When they do these science experiments. But we need more teachers that are willing and better paid that can get into some of these school systems to actually teach the children a love for science, not just a teacher who's just trying to make a paycheck.
Definitely. I mean, everybody has to be, compensated fairly, and everybody has a right to, live a good life, for themselves and their families. And I don't necessarily equate that to a certain salary, but certainly has to be a salary which is reasonable for the environment that you live in, right? So it's super expensive in Southern California, not as expensive in, let's say, the Midwest. And so that is super important. But one segue back to what you said before, Joel, in the concept of money. So I'm a huge Star Trek fan. And so if you know anything about the Star Trek universe, the concept of money doesn't exist in the Star Trek universe. So they talk about it all the time. Oh, money? What's that? We got rid of that, centuries ago, right? We're all about discovery, experience. And I think there's a lot of my mindset, which is related to whether it's altruism or just pure exploration, that I think if young people are more focused in that way on how they can make a difference, then if you are a professional, in the STEM fields, you're actually going to make a good salary anyway. So it's kind of like almost an aside, but the motivation needs to come from within. It can't come from financial. And I think that's a challenge that exists in American society, is that materialism. We were talking about earlier about $175 to go to Disneyland. That's kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, why view that as a necessity, right? When you could just go outside and enjoy the beautiful outdoors in Southern California instead of going to Anaheim, which is not exactly the most beautiful location. Sorry,
Anaheim. Yeah.
Nice disclaimer. Oh, we have a comment from my friend Carrie, my fellow geologist from Boston University. So from a parent standpoint, teachers often want people to come and do presentations. When I offer to bring in my rock and mineral collection, of course you do, my kids love it and the teachers love it. All scientists welcome. So that's important too, bringing in parents that maybe have a background in science and engineering, coming in and teaching. That's a brilliant idea. I think more people should do that. And thank you, Carrie, for paying attention and writing that comment in. That's helpful.
And with the virtual formats that exist today, and I would say that have grown in quality and ease of use due to the pandemic, there's many ways you can do that internationally. So I did so many talks for students in India over the pandemic with never leaving my office.
Yeah. you know, the pandemic has worked out quite well for improving our capabilities of doing remote learning, remote discussions. I've done numerous conferences that I would have never been able to attend because they're out of this country. And so, yeah, I'll listen to something at 6 a.m. Pacific time, but it's fine. I do that. Yes, Joel, I get up early. You know this.
I get up early too, but I'm not doing a 6 a.m. call. Nobody wants that.
I'll be walking the dogs, holding my phone up, and I'm like, shh.
Nobody needs me at that hour. Nobody.
No, we do not. No, I know you. I know you well enough. We don't need that.
Yeah.
But we're coming up to our 20 minutes. But Anita, is there anything that you would like to share about future of technology, future, you know, of transportation, hydrogen or fuel cells, anything that you see coming or that you'd like to share to give people momentum?
Yeah, so I think, you know, obviously now I'm an entrepreneur, I have my own company. And so being in that space, you can see kind of what are the hot topic areas. And there obviously is going to be a lot of investment, both from governmental side as well as from private investor side to develop technologies to address climate change. So whether that's energy production, energy storage, or actual, you know, imparting the energy into mobility system, I think that's a really important area for people to consider, both taking new jobs in, as well as starting new companies in. And, you know, I think there's been a great movement on the ground-based transportation front with the electrification of cars, using batteries for energy storage. That doesn't necessarily work so well for larger vehicles like buses and trucks, which also need to be electrified. Also doesn't work so well for the Hyperloop, which is a potential new form of transportation that I also worked on for a couple of years. And then for aviation. So one of the most important things is to start developing technologies now for aviation to decarbonize them in, you know, the 10 to 20 to 30 year time frames. That's what I'm focused on with my company, is the development of hydrogen fuel cells specifically for the aviation use case.
And I love that. And just so people understand that might be new to hydrogen, we're not pumping hydrogen into a plane and igniting it. It's going into a fuel cell and being converted into electricity. Because a lot of people are like, well, what if it blows up? It's not. This is different.
Well, and actually from a flammability perspective, gasoline is more flammable than hydrogen because hydrogen is a really small molecule, so it diffuses rapidly. So people have this perception that it's dangerous. It's not. It's just very efficient, and you would have to treat it as you would treat any type of fuel. And so, so that's, and hydrogen is so efficient. That's the reason why it's used in launch vehicles, right? Liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen.
Exactly. So from rocket scientists to revolutioning the way that we fly our passenger planes, I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us today. I love the education aspect. We got to teach the kids young, every background, every ethnicity, gay, lesbian, everyone is included, because if you start excluding people, you're going to miss out on a huge amount of knowledge base. So thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful day, and we will see you guys next time. Take care.
Thank you.